He ran the most feared crime family on the eastern seaboard. But tonight, he was nothing but a beggar shaking in the cold. He walked into the fluorescent-lit diner, expecting to be thrown out. Instead, a heavy-set waitress with kind eyes and an exhausted smile set a hot plate in front of him. Never guessing that she had just tied her fate to the most dangerous man in Providence. The rain had been falling since noon, needling down over the harbor and turning the streets slick and black. Inside, the Blue Compass Diner, a 24-hour joint tucked into the corner of Harbor Street and Vine. The air smelled like burnt coffee grounds, hot grease, and the faint bleach tang of a floor that had just been mopped. Odette Marsh wiped down the cracked vinyl of booth number 7, her shoulders aching from 6 hours on her feet. She was a big woman, built solid and round, the kind of woman the world liked to look past or look down on, depending on its mood that day. She was north of 300 pounds and had been for years, and she had absorbed every sideways glance, every muttered comment, every careless cruelty that came with existing in a body society decided it had permission to judge. But underneath all of that, Odette had a spine forged out of something unbreakable, and a heart that stayed soft, no matter how many times the world tried to bruise it. She picked up double shifts most weeks, chasing down the medical bills her mother had left behind, $52,000 of debt from 2 years of chemotherapy that hadn't been enough to save her. Odette's uniform, a faded blue dress with a stained apron, clung too tightly across her broad back and thick arms. But she never once apologized for taking up space. The bell over the door jingled. Cutting through the low buzz of the walk-in cooler, a man staggered in looking like the storm had personally tried to drown him. His coat was an oversized canvas work jacket, torn at one elbow, soaked through and heavy. His dark hair was plastered flat against his skull, and there was a smear of grime along his jaw that looked almost too deliberate to be real. Though nobody in the diner was paying close enough attention to notice, he kept his head down, dragging his boots as he shuffled toward the counter. "Hey, no loitering." Renata, the other waitress on shift, snapped her gum without looking up from the register. "You gotta order something, or you gotta go." "Mr. Whitcomb doesn't run a shelter." The man froze mid-step. He dug through a soaked pocket and came up with a handful of nickels and a single crumpled $5 bill. I just wanted some hot water," he mumbled, his voice low and rough, like gravel dragged over pavement, "and maybe a lemon wedge, if you've got one." Renata rolled her eyes and turned back to wiping down the espresso machine. "Hot water's for paying customers. Buddy, try the shelter on Fenner Street." "Renata, knock it off." Odette stepped out from behind the counter, her heavy footsteps soft despite her size. She crossed the checkered floor and stopped in front of the stranger, ignoring the wet wool smell rolling off him in waves. When he finally lifted his head, something in Odette's chest twisted sideways. Underneath the dirt and the several days' worth of stubble, his eyes were a startling, pale gray, sharp as broken glass. They didn't match the rest of him at all. They were the eyes of something that hunted, not something that begged. "Sit down," Odette said gently, nodding toward the booth closest to the radiator. "You're freezing half to death." He hesitated a long moment. Like sitting down was a decision that cost him something. And then he slid into the booth. His name was Cormac Doyle. Cormac was not a vagrant. He was the head of the Doyle crime family. a man whose reach touched half the city council and most of the harbor commission for the past 9 months. His world had been unraveling, thread by thread. His own lieutenants had been caught skimming. His fiancée, Vivienne Ashcroft, had tried to sell his shipping routes to a rival outfit for a payday that would have made her richer than marrying him ever could. He was surrounded, every hour of every day, by people who smiled at him and calculated his net worth behind their teeth, disgusted by the rot at the center of his own life. Cormac had come up with an idea that his men thought was either insane or suicidal. Possibly both. He wanted to strip away the tailored suits, the Range Rover, the platinum watch, and see what the world looked like when he had nothing to offer anyone. His late father, the man who had built the Doyle organization out of nothing but a fishing boat and a willingness to fight, used to say that the only currency that mattered in this life was whether a stranger would help you when they had nothing to gain from it. Cormac had spent 9 months watching everyone around him fail that test spectacularly, and he had reached the point where he needed to know, for his own sanity, whether it was even still possible to pass. For 5 days, he had wandered the city in disguise, sleeping in stairwells, panhandling on street corners. He had been spat at outside a church. He had been threatened by a beat cop who told him to move along or spend the night in a cell. A woman waiting for a bus had clutched her purse to her chest and crossed the street rather than stand near him. He had very nearly decided that human decency was a myth, invented by people who'd never had to test it. And then, soaked to the bone and half frozen, he walked into the Blue Compass diner. Odette did not just bring him hot water. 10 minutes later, she came back, balancing a heavy tray on one wide hip. She set down a plate, piled with shepherd's pie, a mound of buttery colcannon, a side of roasted carrots, and a steaming mug of black coffee. Cormac stared at the food like it might vanish if he blinked. I can't pay for this," he said, keeping the tremor in his voice deliberate. "I showed you what I have. Keep your $5. Hoon." Odette smiled, and it changed her whole face, softened the tired lines around her eyes, lit something warm behind them. "It's on the house. My shift meal. Actually, I'm supposed to be cutting back on carbs after 8 anyway," she added, patting her stomach with a rueful little laugh. "Eat. Looks like you need it worse than I do." Cormac watched her walk away and noticed, with a clarity that felt like a blade sliding between his ribs, the way every other customer in the diner angled their bodies slightly away from her, the way nobody made eye contact when she passed. He understood, in the space of a few seconds, exactly what her life must cost her every single day. And she had just given away her own dinner to a stranger who looked like he might rob her, as he ate the best shepherd's pie he had eaten in his entire life. Cormac made a private vow. He was going to learn everything there was to know about this woman over the following 7 weeks. The drifter became a Blue Compass regular every Monday and Friday night. Cormac would leave his penthouse in the Waterline district, peel off his cashmere, and pull the ruined work jacket back over his shoulders. His second in command, Vire, sharp-eyed man named Rourke. I thought his boss had lost his mind entirely. "Boss, with respect, this is madness," Rourke had said one night, parked 2 blocks from the diner in an armored SUV with the heater running. "The Sorokin crew is making a play for the Northgate rail yards, and you're playing dress-up to eat cold fries with a waitress. You don't get it." Rourke. Cormac rubbed the fake dirt deeper into the creases of his knuckles. For 3 hours a week. Nobody's trying to kill me. Nobody's asking me for a favor or a loan or a piece of the docks. And she looks at me like I'm just a person. It was true. Cormac and Odette had built something neither of them had a name for yet. Something quiet and real. During the slow hours of the night shift, she would sit across from him in the booth, folding napkins into little paper fans while they talked. And she never held anything back. She told him about her childhood in a mill town 2 hours north, about being the fat kid nobody picked for kickball, about learning early that laughter aimed at her wasn't really about her at all. She told him about her mother, a seamstress named Bridget, who used to sing off-key while she hemmed prom dresses for other people's daughters, who never once, not on her very worst day, made Odette feel like her body was something to apologize for. She told him about sitting in a plastic chair in an oncology ward for 11 months, about the particular sound of an IV pump in the middle of the night, about learning to say the word hospice without her voice breaking. She used to tell me I took up exactly the amount of space I was supposed to take up. Odette said one night, turning a paper napkin over and over in her hands instead of folding it, "Not less, not more." I think about that a lot now that she's not around to say it anymore. People look at a big woman. Odette told him one slow Friday night, her voice dropping low, almost private. And they think they've got the whole story figured out in about 4 seconds. They think I'm lazy. They think I don't have any self-control. Like, that's the only thing that could possibly explain a body like mine. They don't know. I picked up 60-hour weeks so my mom could get one more round of chemo. They don't know. I sold my car for her copay. Some nights. I want to disappear into the wallpaper and stop being looked at all. Under the table. Cormac's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles ached. A protectiveness rose in him that felt almost violent in its intensity. He had the resources to erase her debt with one phone call. He could buy this diner outright and burn it to the studs if he felt like it. Just to prove he could. But he couldn't break the illusion. Not yet. He had become addicted to the uncomplicated, unpurchased kindness she handed him. Night after night. No strings attached. She started saving him the last slice of apple pie. She slipped him paperback westerns from the used bin at the library sale. When the November wind turned vicious, she showed up with a flannel-lined coat she'd picked up at a church rummage sale for $4. Sized too large. "Just in case you fill out a little," she'd said. Blushing, but the real world has a way of finding the places you try to hide. The turn came on a bitter Wednesday night. The diner was nearly empty, except for a couple of long-haul truckers nursing coffee in the back booth. Cormac was in his usual seat, hands wrapped around a mug. When the front door banged open hard enough to rattle the bell off its hook, in walked Vivienne Ashcroft, wrapped in a charcoal fur coat, her nose wrinkling in open disgust at the smell of the place. On her arm, unmistakable, even in the dim light, was Victor Sorokin, the very man Rourke had been warning Cormac about for weeks. They had clearly come from somewhere expensive and were slumming it as a joke. Loud, a little drunk, looking for something to laugh at. Cormac's blood went to ice. If Sorokin recognized him sitting here in rags, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment. It would be a declaration of weakness, broadcast to every crew in the city, to the head of the Doyle family. Unarmed, disguised as a beggar in a diner booth. It would mean war by sunrise. He slumped. Lower, dragging his collar up and tugging a stained ball cap down over his brow. Pressing himself into the shadowed corner of the booth, Vivienne strode to the counter, her heels clicking sharply against the tile, and drummed her manicured nails on the formica. Odette stepped up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome to the Blue Compass. What can I get you?" Vivienne looked Odette over slowly, deliberately, her mouth curling into something cruel. She took in the heavy set of Odette's shoulders, the roll of her stomach against the apron, the cheap uniform straining at the seams. "Oh my God. Victor." Vivienne laughed, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Look at the size of her. Do they pay you in gravy?" "Sweetheart, I didn't realize they let manatees work the floor." Sorokin chuckled darkly, leaning one elbow against the counter like he owned the building. Odette's face went hot with a familiar, humiliating flush. She had heard every variation of this before, and it never once stopped landing like a slap. She swallowed hard and kept her voice level. "If you're not ordering, Mum, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." "Oh, it talks." Vivienne stepped closer, sneering. "We want 2 black coffees. Quickly. Please. God. It reeks of onions in here." Then Vivienne's gaze drifted, sharp and searching, across the diner and snagged on the hunched figure in the corner booth. "Wait just a second," she murmured, drifting away from the counter, walking slow and deliberate toward Cormac's table. Cormac stopped breathing entirely. His hand slid, casual as he could make it, toward the folding knife tucked into his boot, the only weapon he dared carry in disguise. He braced himself to gut Sorokin right there on the checkered floor if it came to that. "Look at this trash," Vivienne sneered, standing directly over Cormac's table. "Victor, this bum's got the same cheap watch you bought as a gag last Christmas." She leaned down, reaching for the bill of his cap. "Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you," before her fingers could close on the cap. A wide, solid body stepped directly between them. It was Odette. She planted her considerable frame like a wall, blocking Vivienne from getting anywhere near Cormac. "Step back from him," Odette said, her voice trembling, but her stance carved from stone. "Excuse me," Vivienne snapped. Glaring up, she had to look up at the much larger woman. "Move. You're blocking my light." I said, "Step back." Odette's voice climbed, gathering authority as it went. "He's a paying customer, and he's a decent man. You don't get to walk into my diner in your fancy coat and treat people like garbage just because you can afford to. You want to make fun of somebody. Make fun of me. I've heard it all. I can take it. But you leave him alone. Get out." Sorokin stepped forward, his hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket in a gesture that was unmistakably a threat. "Watch that mouth. Waitress, you have no idea who you're talking to." Every muscle in Cormac's body coiled like a wound spring. If Sorokin pulled a weapon, the disguise was finished, and he would have to end this in front of 2 truckers and a security camera. But Odette didn't flinch. "I don't care who you are." She reached behind her without looking, closing her fist around the handle of a scalding kettle of black tea that had been steeping on the warmer, and held it up like a weapon. "I will call the police. And while we wait, I will pour this straight into your lap. Out. Now." The diner went absolutely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sorokin. Apparently deciding a diner scuffle wasn't worth the risk of police attention when he had unlicensed weapons in the car outside. Scoffed and grabbed Vivienne's elbow. Forget it. Viv, this dump is ruining my coat anyway. Vivienne shot one last venomous look at Odette. Disgusting. She spat, before spinning on her heel and storming out into the rain. Sorokin trailing behind her the moment the door swung shut. Odette led tout along, shaking breath and set the kettle down, with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She turned back to the booth, staring down at Cormac, who was looking up at her with an expression somewhere between shock and reverence. You okay? Cor, she asked softly, one tear sliding loose before she wiped it away fast. I'm sorry about that. People can be so ugly. Cormac looked at this woman, big, brave, radiant with fury on his behalf, who had just planted her body between him and a man she believed could hurt her. All to protect a stranger she thought had nothing to give her in return. And in that exact instant, Cormac Doyle understood, with a certainty that felt almost like falling, that he was completely and helplessly in love with her. And right behind that realization came a colder one. He was in love with her, and he had lied to her from the very first night. When she found out what he really was, a man with blood on his ledgers, a man who had just come within a breath of killing someone 3 feet from her, it wouldn't just hurt her. It might break something in her that could never be put back together for the rest of that night. Odette couldn't shake the memory of the change in his eyes, the way they had gone flat and sharp and calculating for half a second before he caught himself. The way his whole body had gone rigid, like a drawn bowstring. He wasn't just some drifter down on his luck. There was something dangerous folded up inside him. But she pushed the thought down, telling herself it was just the trauma of a hard life on the street. The kind of vigilance anyone would carry after enough nights sleeping rough. 2 days later, something impossible happened. Mr. Whitcomb handed Odette an envelope that had come to the diner addressed to her by name. Inside was a letter from something called Meridian Trust, informing her she'd been selected for a hardship grant that would cover the entirety of her outstanding medical debt, along with an offer of employment, an administrative position downtown, salaried, with benefits. More money than she had ever imagined earning in her life. She brought the papers to the diner with shaking hands. When Cormac shuffled in that night, she practically shoved them across the table at him. Cor, look at this. It has to be a scam. Right. Her eyes were wide, torn between fear and a hope she was almost afraid to let herself feel. Nobody just wipes out $52,000 for a diner waitress out of nowhere. Cormac's stomach dropped as he scanned the letterhead. He recognized the shell entity immediately. He had been careless, too eager to fix her life in one sweeping gesture. And he'd routed the grant through a holding company, only 2 degrees removed from his actual empire. If she pulled the wrong thread, the whole disguise would unravel in her hands. He had to pivot fast, or he'd lose her before she ever learned his real name. Maybe it's just good luck. The lie came out steady, practiced. Maybe somebody finally noticed how hard you work. Odette. I don't know. She chewed her lip. It feels heavy, like there's a price tag hiding somewhere in the fine print. There's no price on kindness. Cormac reached across the table and covered her hand with his palm rough with fake calluses. his touch somehow grounding despite everything. Take the job. If it's a scam, you walk away with nothing lost. If it's real, you finally get to breathe. She took the job for 3 weeks. Odette lived 2 entirely separate lives. By day, she sat in a glass-walled office downtown, learning to file reports and answer phones for a company whose actual purpose she never once questioned. By night, she went back to the Blue Compass to see the homeless man she had somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with. It was an exhausting, exhilarating kind of secret. She started wearing fitted blouses to work, and her posture changed. She stood taller, met people's eyes instead of ducking them, laughed louder. Confidence bloomed in her like something long dormant, finally getting sunlight. Cormac watched the transformation from his booth and felt something in his chest ache every single time. But the Sorokin family had been watching too. Victor, humiliated in front of his own crew by a fat waitress wielding a kettle of tea, had put a man on her without telling anyone why. He couldn't work out yet why the beggar mattered enough to protect with her own body. But he understood the oldest rule in the underworld. You never touched a man's woman unless you were prepared to burn his whole world down in retaliation. He didn't know Cormac's real identity yet, but he knew Odette Marsh was the loose thread that would unravel it. It happened on a Tuesday. Rain hammered the windows of the downtown office tower as Odette worked late, alone, on her floor, to finishing a report. Nobody had actually asked her to finish. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and died. She stood, reaching for her phone, when the door to the suite slammed open. 3 men in black tactical gear stepped through, moving with the kind of coordinated silence that had nothing to do with being muggers. Odette Marsh. The lead man's voice was flat, almost bored. Who are you? She backed toward the window, heart slamming against her ribs. She was terrified. But some part of her reached for the same steel that had let her stare down a woman in a fur coat weeks earlier. Her fingers closed around a heavy glass award trophy on a nearby desk. "We've got a message for your boyfriend." The man sneered. They didn't care about the security cameras. They didn't care about the law. They had her wrists zip-tied and her mouth taped before she could scream twice. And they dragged her out through the stairwell and into an unmarked van idling in the alley. As the van lurched into motion, Odette was thrown against the wheel well, and in the darkness, staring at 3 armed strangers. She understood, with sudden, terrible clarity, that none of this had anything to do with her filing reports or serving diner food. This was about him, about the quiet, gray-eyed man who sat in booth 7 and drank her coffee 2 nights a week. "Who are you?" "Cor," she screamed silently into the dark. Across town, Cormac stood in the vast silence of his penthouse in the Waterline district. The city smeared gold and silver through rain-streaked floor-to-ceiling windows. A glass of untouched bourbon sat sweating on his desk beside a Polaroid he'd taken secretly one night. Odette, laughing at something Renata had said. Her whole face lit up. He had planned to tell her everything that night. He had a small velvet box in his coat pocket, holding a cushion-cut sapphire ring that had cost more than the diner's entire building. Then the heavy double doors of his study slammed open. Rourke burst in, his face bloodless, a burner phone shaking in his hand. "Boss." His voice was tight, stripped of its usual dry humor. Sorokin's crew hit the Meridian office an hour ago. They took her. They took Odette. Cormac didn't shout. He didn't hurl the glass across the room. Instead, Something in him went eerily, terrifyingly still. The tired, grateful man who ate shepherd's pie in booth 7 died in that single second, replaced completely by the man who had built and buried half the harbor's rival operations over 15 brutal years. He stood, his jaw set like poured concrete. He crossed to the hidden panel behind his bookshelf, punched in the code, and pulled out a custom 4.5 caliber pistol, racking the slide with a sound like a door slamming shut on his old life. "Call every soldier on the payroll," Cormac said, and his voice had dropped into a register that made even Rourke go pale. "Lock down the rail yards, the bridges, and the harbor warehouses. If one hair on her head is out of place, I will personally carve Victor Sorokin into pieces and burn every branch of his bloodline to ash." Meanwhile, in a rusted-out cannery on the edge of the harbor, Odette was shoved into a metal folding chair hard enough to knock the wind out of her. Her wrists, bound with zip ties, had already gone numb. The room smelled of salt, rust, and something rotten underneath it. And the cold coming off the concrete floor seeped straight through her thin work blouse. She was bruised along one cheekbone, her sleeve torn at the shoulder, but she refused to cry. She had survived 32 years in a body the world constantly tried to make her ashamed of. She was not about to fall apart in front of men in cheap suits who thought fear was the same thing as power. Victor Sorokin paced in front of her, twirling a combat knife lazily between his fingers. "I don't understand it," he said, looking her over with open contempt. "You're a nobody, a big girl slinging plates in a grease pit. Why does the ghost care about you? What are you hiding? I don't know what you're talking about." Odette lifted her chin, seething, despite the fear crawling up her spine. "If you want money, my boss will pay whatever you're asking. Just let me go." Sorokin laughed, sharp and humorless. "Your boss doesn't exist. Sweetheart, you're a pawn in a game you don't even—" The wall exploded inward. A reinforced SUV tore straight through the corrugated steel siding of the cannery in a shower of sparks and screeching metal, slamming to a stop against a support column. Before the dust settled, the doors were already open, and men in dark tactical gear flooded the space like water finding cracks. Red laser sights slicing through the gloom. Then Cormac stepped through the wreckage. Odette's breath caught. He wasn't wearing the ruined work jacket. He wasn't hunched or shrinking or apologizing for taking up space in the world. Cormac stood in a flawless charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him like a second skin. His shoulders squared, his posture radiating an authority so absolute it filled the entire ruined building. The grey eyes that had once looked at her across a diner table with such quiet gratitude were now cold as winter glass, locked on Sorokin with an intent that needed no translation. Cormac's Doyle. Sorokin breathed, stumbling back a step. He looked from the impeccably dressed Don to the plus-size woman zip-tied to the chair, and something in his expression cracked open as the pieces slammed together. You were the beggar in the diner. You fell for the fat waitress." "I did," Cormac said, and his voice rolled through the cannery like a verdict. "And because I fell for her, Victor, I gave you 3 extra weeks to live that you didn't deserve. That grace period just ended." Sorokin panicked, swinging his weapon toward Odette. He never got the chance to fire. Cormac moved with a precision that looked almost gentle, squeezing off a single shot that took Sorokin through the left shoulder the rival boss screamed, crumpling against the concrete in a spreading pool of dark red, his gun clattering away uselessly. Around them, Cormac's men disarmed the rest of the Sorokin crew in under 30 seconds. Controlled and merciless, Cormac didn't spare the carnage a second glance. He crossed the floor in a dead sprint and dropped to his knees in front of Odette, pulling a folding blade from his pocket to slice through the zip ties with hands that, for the first time in his adult life, were visibly shaking. "Odette, look at me." He framed her face gently, desperately, in both palms. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" She flinched back against the chair, her chest heaving, staring at a man she suddenly wasn't sure she had ever actually known. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked on the words, tears finally spilling over. "The man I fed couldn't afford a cup of coffee. You shot someone. You lied to me. Every single night. You sat in that booth and let me feel sorry for you. My name is Cormac Doyle," he said quietly, ignoring the blood and the moaning and the chaos still churning behind him. "I run this city's harbor trade. I lied because my entire world is built out of people who only want my money or my protection. I needed to know if a single person on this earth could care about me when I had absolutely nothing to give them. You gave me your dinner. You stood between me and a killer with a pot of tea. You saved my life long before I ever came to save yours." The war that followed lasted a brutal 72 hours and ended with the near-total collapse of the Sorokin operation along the eastern seaboard. Local news ran 3 separate segments on unexplained violence near the harbor district, none of them ever connecting a hospitalized diner waitress to the sudden disappearance of an entire criminal syndicate. Regulars at the Blue Compass whispered about it for weeks, how Odette had vanished for 4 days and come back pale and quiet. How a black SUV now idled outside the diner every night she worked. How Renata swore up and down she'd seen a man in a suit that probably cost more than the building slip in through the back door at closing time. Mr. Whitcomb, for his part, to never asked questions. He just started keeping booth. 7 reserved. Odette went back to work, exactly 9 days after the cannery. Over Rourke's strenuous objections and 2 separate offers of round-the-clock protection at a private estate, she had flatly refused. She said she needed something ordinary to hold on to, something with her own 2 hands. And nobody, not even the head of the Doyle family, was in any position to argue with her about that. But something had shifted underneath her. A fault line that hadn't been there before. She was still kind. She was still fierce. But every time the bell over the door jingled, some part of her braced for the worst. And it took a long time for that part to go quiet again. Cormac's hardest fight, in the end, wasn't against Victor's men. It was winning back the trust of the woman he loved. 6 weeks later, they stood together in the center of his penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the whole glittering sweep of the waterline district beneath a clear night sky. Odette had asked for space after the cannery, and agonizing as it had been, Cormac had given it to her, calling only when she allowed it, showing up only when she asked. In the 6 weeks between the cannery and this night, he had called every single day. And every single day she had let exactly 2 of those calls go to voicemail before finally picking up. He had sent no flowers, no jewelry, nothing that could be mistaken for a bribe only. Once a week, a single paperback Western left with Mr. Whitcomb At the counter. The same kind she used to slip him when he was pretending to have nothing. She never said thank you for them. She kept everyone on the windowsill of her apartment anyway. Now she stood before him in a deep emerald dress that fit her curves like it had been poured onto her. And she looked, Cormac thought, like something out of a dream he hadn't let himself have. You don't get to test people like that, Odette said, her voice steady, unshaking. I have spent my whole life being sized up and judged for my weight, for my job, for where I come from. I refuse to be some billionaire's experiment in whether poor fat women are capable of kindness. If you want me, Kormats, you take all of me, as an equal. No more secrets, no more lies. Or I walk out that door tonight, and I don't look back. Cormac stepped closer, his eyes burning with something that looked a great deal like devotion, and sank slowly to one knee in front of her. You are my equal, he said, his voice thick. You're my queen. Odette. No more lies. Just you, standing beside me. Running this city with me if that's what you want. He drew the velvet box from his jacket and opened it. The sapphire catching the light like a held breath. Odette looked down at the ring, and then at the terrifying, powerful man kneeling in front of her, utterly at her mercy for the first time since she'd met him. A slow smile broke across her face, warm and radiant, and she held out her hand. Life rarely comes in clean lines, especially in a city built on old money and older secrets. Cormac and Odette proved, in their own strange way, that real power was never about how much fear a person could inspire or how much wealth they could hoard. It was about finding the one person willing to stand between you and the world when you had nothing at all to offer them in return. Odette kept her job at the diner for another year after the ring went on her finger, waving off every argument Cormac made about it, until the morning she finally admitted she just liked the work too much to walk away from it entirely. She trained 2 new waitresses herself, and neither of them ever heard a customer get away with calling her a name in that dining room. Not once. Not ever again. Down on Harbour Street. Regulars at the Blue Compass still tell the story sometimes. Over coffee gone, lukewarm. About the big waitress in booth 7 who tamed the most dangerous man on the waterproof, if anyone still needed it. That a heart of gold can be the sharpest weapon in the whole city